What's up everybody and welcome back to Retro Gamer Gen X's Retro Gaming and Computing channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Commodore's two best-selling computers, the Commodore 64 and the Amiga 500. And what this video is just a compilation of my look-ats and my history videos of the Amiga and the Commodore 64 all wrapped up into one video, just showcasing these two wonderful computers. Now, if you guys have missed my retro video game history videos that I did, go ahead and click this link above and that'll take you to each and every one of those videos. I showcase video game consoles from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, all in different videos per decade. And once again, I just wanted to thank all my viewers and subscribers for all the support that you've given the channel for the past year and a half. It's just been a great journey just showing everybody the history about these video game consoles and computers. Just a love and a passion that I have. Also, if you like the content, go ahead and hit that like button, and then don't forget to hit that subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you get notifications every time I drop new content like this. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at Commodore's two best-selling computers, the Commodore 64 and the Amiga 500.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you. In a world of fun and fantasy and ever-changing views and computer terminology, Commodore is news. Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you. Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
The story of the Commodore 64 really starts in World War II Europe. Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, starting what would become World War II. The Nazi occupying forces rounded up Jewish people in masses, in one of the biggest atrocities known to mankind. One of the families that were rounded up were the Trasmiels, Abraham and Rivka, and their 10-year-old son, Idik. They were incarcerated and were shipped off to the Jewish ghetto of Lodz. During this time, Idik was forced to work at a garment factory. World War II was in its infancy, but evil was growing at an exponential rate. The Nazis had determined that the final solution had begun, and the Jewish ghettos were beginning to be liquidated. At this point, Jewish people, along with the Trasmiels, were being shipped to concentration camps, better known as death camps. The Trasmiels were sent to the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp. It was here where little Idik and his father were examined by the angel of death himself, Josef Mengele. Due to them being male and being physically able to work, both little Idik and his father were sent to the Alem labor camp, while Rivka was separated from her family and forced to stay behind at Auschwitz. While at this labor camp, Idik's father had died. Official Nazi paperwork stated he died of typhus, but Idik knew otherwise, blaming the Nazis for injecting his father with gasoline to kill him. Idik continued to work at the labor camp as the days turned into months and the months turned into years. In April of 1945, the 84th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army liberated the labor camp. Idik was finally free. By this time, Idik had spent 6 years incarcerated by the Nazis and was now 16 years old. In November of 1947, Idik changed his name to Jack Trammell and immigrated to the United States, where in 1948 he joined the U.S. Army. While in the Army, he learned how to work on and use office equipment such as typewriters and mechanical adding machines. After being enlisted for 4 years, he was honorably discharged in 1952. He moved to New York City and became a cab driver. In 1953, he secured a $25,000 loan to start a business from the U.S. Army Entitlement Fund. Jack had started a typewriter business, but needed to come up with a catchy name. Because of his time spent in the military, he wanted something that had a military title, and this is where he came up with the name Commodore. He named the company Commodore Portable Typewriters, and began selling Czechoslovakian typewriters. This also became an issue, seeing that Czechoslovakia was a bloc country and was embargoed by the US. So he set up Commodore business machines in Toronto, Canada, and started having the parts of the Czechoslovakian typewriter sent to him so CBM could assemble them and sell them in North America. The business was never very successful, and by 1962 it was in financial trouble. Cheap Japanese typewriters were flooding the market, and the old Czechoslovakian typewriters were no longer profitable. At this point, Canadian businessman Irving Gold invested $400,000 into Commodore to relaunch the company as an adding machine business. Trammell and Gold started to work together, and Gold suggested that Trammell travel to Japan, their rivals, to learn why they were able to outsell American companies in America. During this trip, Jack saw the first digital calculators and decided that the adding machine business was not going to be profitable either. Commodore started producing calculators using integrated circuits from Texas Instruments, but Texas Instruments, being the savvy business people they were, saw Commodore making a profit off of their own chips and decided to make calculators themselves at a much lower cost. Because they owned their own chip fab, they could outprice Commodore substantially, and Commodore got burned again. But Trammell and Gold were not finished. Gold invested another $3 million into Commodore so they could acquire MOS Technologies, which was an IC design and semiconductor manufacturer. Now Commodore could make their own chips and compete with the likes of Texas Instruments. However, lead designer of MOS Technologies, Chuck Peddle, met with Trammell and told him calculators were not the future. Computers were. Trammell told Peddle to design a computer and to show him that his logic was sound. And this was the beginning of the Commodore PET computer, the first successful computer that Commodore had produced. It really was not a personal computer, it was more geared towards businesses and education. Trammell saw that other companies like Apple and Atari were selling personal computers with color graphics, and he needed to do this to stay competitive. Commodore's Bob Russell designed the VIC-20, a personal computer with color graphics. The VIC-20 was the first personal computer to sell over 1 million units, and was Commodore's first big success. In 1981, MOS Technology started a project to create the next-gen sound and graphics chips. They were named SID, Sound Interface Device, and VIC-2, Video Integrated Circuit for Graphics. The SID chip was designed by Bob Yanes, and the VIC-2 by Al Carpenter. The new chipset was first used in the Commodore Ultimax, designed by Commodore of Japan's Yosh Takara. Now, this was an interesting system. It was designed as a game console using the chipset, but only had 2 kilobytes of RAM, no BASIC, and only used cartridges or a tape drive. So this was really a Franken console, half computer and half game consoles. So like a lot of game consoles in the early 80s, they just couldn't make up their minds what they wanted this to be. It wasn't very successful, and only a few units were produced for the Japanese market. It was about this time that Russell, Yanes, Carpenter, and Charles Winterbull, manager of MOS, pitched the idea of a low-cost successor of the VIC-20 to Jack Trammell. The VIC-20 was successful but underpowered. Trammell wanted to create a low-cost, powerful personal computer with stunning graphics and sound, and he wanted it to have 64 kilobytes of RAM. But RAM at this time was still pretty pricey and would make the computer very expensive. But Jack knew the market, and by the time this computer was being produced, the cost had reduced significantly. It was at this point that Jack coined the phrase, computers for the masses and not the classes.
At the lowest price to the masses. Mm-hmm. We are a company which we like to sell to the masses, not to the classes.
Okay. Well,
The project was named the VIC-40. The computer was to be shown at the 1982 CES show in January. The team worked for months over Thanksgiving and Christmas to complete the hardware and software for the project. They had completed it by January of 1982, just in time for the show. It was in the same case and used the same basic ROM as the VIC-20. It was shown at CES for a selling price of $595, and the crowd, along with Atari reps, went wild. How could they sell such a powerful machine at such a low cost? The same way Commodore had been priced out of the calculator market, now they own their own chip fab, bringing Commodore's cost per unit down to $135, giving them a huge profit margin. Commodore was competing with the likes of Atari, Texas Instruments, Tandy, and Apple. Within a matter of months, a pricing war started.
The price of the C64 was reduced to $2.99. Most of Commodore's competitors lowered their prices as well. Texas Instruments lowered the cost of the TI-99 to just $99, taking a loss on each unit. And by October of 1983, TI pulled out of the personal computing market. Commodore got its revenge on TI for what they did to them in the calculator market years earlier. But not all things were great for Commodore in the C64. Early production models had a high failure rate due to a defect in the PLA design. This was corrected in later revisions, but the damage had been done. In fact, rumors started circulating that the C64 would be discontinued by 1985, but sales of the unit stayed strong as Commodore continued to revise the motherboard and cut cost, and bring those savings to the consumer. Rumors of its discontinuation fell flat as sales rose. Then in 1984, during a closed-door meeting, Jack Tramiel and Irvin Gold had their final falling out. It's not clear what really went on in this meeting. Some have said Tramiel wanted his sons to be on the board and have control over the company, while Gold disagreed with that. Some have also said that it was Gold stating that he didn't like how Tramiel was running the company. Everything had to be approved by Jack, and projects were being put on hold because of this. And years later, after Jack's passing away, his son stated what was really said during this meeting. Jack had brought up how Gold was using company assets on himself, cars, jets, trips, etc., instead of investing it into the company. Jack told Gold, "You can't do that while I'm president," which Gold said, "Well, goodbye." 3 days later, Jack resigned from the company he worked so hard to create. This left Gold in charge of Commodore. Also during this time, there were several models of the C64 created. In 1983, the C64 bread bin was introduced. Also, Commodore released the all-in-one unit, the Educator 64, for use in schools. In 1984, the SS64, a portable C64, was introduced. It was intended for the on-the-go businessman. In 1986, Commodore released the redesigned C64C, the same computer but with a revised motherboard and redesigned case. In 1987, Commodore released the C64 Aldi, which was a C64 with a C64C motherboard and a bread bin style case, and were sold in German Aldi discount stores. The last true C64 model was introduced in 1989 and was the C64G. These were basically like the Aldi, but had a lighter case color. These were sold in the European market. The very last iteration of the C64 was the C64GS. It was released in 1990. This was a C64 that was consoleized and used only cartridges and had no keyboard. This product wasn't very successful, only selling 20,000 units. Also, there were two spin-offs to the C64, the Commodore 128 and the C65. The C128 was introduced in 1985 and was fully compatible to the C64, but it was a vast improvement with 128 kilobytes of RAM and had a Z80 coprocessor so it could run CP/M if needed. The C65 was to be a 16-bit successor of the C64, but still compatible, but not 100% compatible due to chip incompatibilities. The project started in 1989, but was discontinued in 1991 due to the competition within the company of Amiga and the fact that computing was starting to move into the 32-bit generation. By 1990, the 8-bit computer was all but obsolete. Commodore's leadership and Irvin Gold was blowing money at a rate that Commodore could not keep up with since the sales of the C64 had slumped to almost nothing and Amiga sales were struggling. Then the failed project of the C65, Amiga CD32, and the multimedia Amiga CD-TV basically did the company in. In March of 1994, Commodore announced the discontinuation of the C64 in 1995, but the company itself didn't make it that long. In fact, a month later, Commodore filed for bankruptcy and all products were discontinued, including the C64, as the company was liquidated. The C64 had an amazing 11.5-year run from 1982 to 1994. Sales of the unit are kind of misleading. Some say that they only sold 12.5 million units, while others claim that they sold over 30 million units. I'm sticking to the fact that they sold over 30 million units, making it the #1 selling personal computer of all time. What a truly amazing story for such an amazing computer.
And now the best new rock performer of the year is...
Stevie Palmer.
Thank you very much. Oh my gosh, did he get over here? Isn't that your next door neighbor?
What a surprise. I'd like to thank my agent, my arranger, and Sheena, the girl next door.
The Amiga computer. Professional video production at amateur prices.
Stevie, you rodent.
Amiga from Commodore. The computer for the creative mind.
For the history of the Amiga, I could literally sit here and spend an hour just talking about the development, the people involved, and the chipset. It'd be way too long and drawn out of a video, so I'm going to do a condensed version. All you Amiga fans, just bear with me. I'm trying to fit this all into a short video, so we'll see how this goes. Now, if you guys have watched my Atari 2600 video, you would recall that Jay Miner designed the TIA chip. He ended up leaving Atari in 1979 after Bushnell left and Warner took over. Miner wanted to develop a next-generation console using the Motorola 68000 CPU, and Atari wanted to live in the past, still using the 6502 base processor for their next console. Later that year, Larry Kaplan left Atari and went on to form Activision. Kaplan was then approached by some investors who wanted to develop a new game system. Kaplan hired Miner and formed a company called High Toro. They started to develop a system codenamed Lorraine. Kaplan left the company in 1983 and Miner was promoted to chief engineer, and the company was renamed Amiga. By 1983, a breadboard version of the Lorraine was created, and it was ready to be shown at the 1984 CES show. During the demonstration, they didn't have an operating system ready yet, so they created a 3D bouncing red and white ball, the Amiga logo that we all know and love today. Unfortunately, even though it was an advanced system, it really didn't catch on, and only one company showed interest in it, and that was Atari. Now by this point, Amiga was running out of funds and needed some quick cash. Talks were ongoing with Atari. Atari loaned Amiga $500,000. Now this loan was short-term and had to be paid by the end of the month, and if it wasn't, then Atari would own the rights to the Lorraine system. This is where the story gets interesting. In 1983, Atari lost over $1 million in 1 week due to the video game crash, and was just siphoning off money left and right. Warner wanted out at this time. In 1984, Jack Tramiel resigned from Commodore, and a lot of engineers went with him. They went to Atari and started to develop their own 68000 base series computer. This is where the two timelines meet. Atari needed a 68000 base series computer, and Amiga had one. Amiga was broke, and Atari thought they had a deal done with the loan Amiga couldn't pay back. This is when Commodore stepped up. Commodore paid off the loan to Atari. They initially tried to complete a $4 million deal licensing the Amiga. But then they offered to buy the company outright for $24 million. Amiga agreed to that, and the rest is pretty much history. By this time, the breadboard prototype of the chipset were now in IC form. In 1985, Commodore released the computer as the Amiga from Commodore, but that name was later changed to the Amiga 1000. Unfortunately for Commodore, sales of the system weren't very good. They were selling, but not as well as expected. Commodore had went all in on the Amiga, so CEO of Commodore, Thomas Ratigan, decided to release 2 versions of the Amiga as a marketing tactic. One was a high-end system that had major amounts of expansion, really more for the video and audio production professionals. The other version of this computer, using the same chipset but on a cost-reduced motherboard, was to be released for the low-end market. Those 2 machines were the Amiga 2000 and the Amiga 500, both being released in 1987 and went on to become very successful machines. But the Amiga 500 sold many more units. The A500 went on to be the best-selling Amiga computer Commodore produced, selling between 4 and 5 million units.